Yes, yes. Good evening. This is Patrick Dankworth from Next Up in the Spotlight coming to everyone. I hope you all doing well. We have a special guest with us today. I want you to welcome Estela Rodriguez Jabril. How are you doing, Estela? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And I'm so honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. We are very honored to have you. We are going to get into some topics that are maybe a little bit taboo or difficult for people to speak to, right? So I'm really happy that you're here to, just kind of clean up the myths, clean up the inconsistencies, and really help people when it comes to communication, right? We're talking everything.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
Fantastic. So let me introduce you before I bring it over to you. So Estela is a licensed clinical therapist, certified energy practitioner, and sex coach. Right, Estela is the host of Let's Talk About Sex on British Muslim TV. She has 15 plus years of experience working with women, couples, children, and adolescents who struggle with emotional issues to understand the root of their pain and trauma. She has been able to successfully help her clients experience transformation after trauma, to resolve issues, and begin to live in peace in that moment. I want to introduce our guest for today, Estela Rodriguez Jabril.
Hello, hello. Good evening. It's evening time wherever you are. Good morning, wherever you're listening from. Good afternoon, right? It's like this is the amazing thing about the internet that we just can connect worldwide. It's such a small world now. And I want to start out by just acknowledging that this is a difficult subject for many to discuss, right?
Yes.
I know it was a really tough subject for me as well,
Okay.
especially when I was raising my three children who are now adults. And I just realized that not only did I need to educate them about sex for prevention, but I also needed to educate myself, and I did, and I strongly urge all of those listening, to allow yourself, give yourself permission to view the topic of sex from a new lens, a new perspective. Sex is that which cannot be named subject still, right? In so many circles of life.
Right.
And yes, the topic of sex creates alertness and even an emotional charge from within, right?
Right. Yes. It absolutely does. And I'm glad that you're here because sometimes we need to shine light on things, just kind of stare at it, look at it, break down some of the stigmas so we can enjoy it, so we can understand it. Sometimes there's fear in things you don't understand, right? So we push it away, we put it under the bed and closet and we hide it. But you know what, the goal for today is really, let's start to look at some of the things that we don't understand, get some education on it, and this way we can have a different approach to it, because I think it can be a beautiful thing, but it can be challenging to navigate if we don't understand it, right? So I'm glad that you're here today. The goal for today's conversation, like you said, is shed some light on it. I really want to get an understanding as to what drove you to speak about it, and maybe tell your story, and then we can kind of get into how we can serve and help people and who you serve in your demographic.
For me, it was really important, especially when I became a parent,
Okay.
because my own childhood was filled with just so much confusion
Mm.
about sex, about sexuality. There was just, no place to really ask questions except with your peers, right? And
Right.
for me, the most turbulent time for me, connected to sex and sexuality, is during my teenage years, because there's so much pressure and there's so much misunderstanding, and nobody wants to feel like they don't belong, right?
Right.
And if we don't educate ourselves, if we don't educate, our generations that need to understand sex and sexuality, because as human beings, yeah, without sex, we don't procreate, we don't continue, and we need to be able to really have a healthy understanding about sex so that we avoid, harmful situations at the individual level, at the community level. I mean, children are born every day. You'd think that sex would be a topic that we can broach, and as we know it, that's not so.
Right.
And this is harmful. This is really harmful at the individual level
Mm.
and at the community level.
Yes.
Something so deeply and intimate as sex, has the profound ability to either heal or harm. And I know that for me personally, there was so much shame when there
Mhm.
came, to the top when I was exploring, when I was trying to understand, when I was trying to educate myself at a young age. And, with misinformation that's out there in the world, what chances do families have? Do young couples starting out? You know, it's so important to really establish a good footing with
Yes.
our understanding.
Yes, it definitely is, right? I mean, I think of even my experience growing up, like it was kind of taboo. It wasn't spoken about, it wasn't really discussed. And when I think of even high school, it was barely discussed. And I know that times have changed so much, and maybe if we have time, we can discuss that. But how does one learn to start to get comfortable with it? Because again, like I grew up, it wasn't really talked about, it wasn't frowned upon, but my parents weren't comfortable talking about it, right? And they probably got that from generationally, their parents weren't comfortable talking about it, so we never, and so you have to kind of go out and learn on your own, and there's a lot of trial and error. For me, there was a lot of error, more error, but
Yeah,
you figure
yeah,
it out. But like how, and then you get into a relationship and there's expectations without knowledge and
yeah.
experience. And like, how do we, I know it's through communication, but how do couples begin to figure that out? Like, where do you think they start?
I mean,
You
it really starts at the individual level. You have to really understand yourself.
Okay.
Have to understand your dreams, your desires, everything always comes back to the self.
Okay.
To, how can you cultivate that clear understanding so that you can have a high level of self-esteem, a high level of confidence within yourself. So
Mhm.
as you navigate through the trials and tribulations of life, you're not, going into this place of shaming yourself and talking down to yourself. I mean,
Okay.
we live in a world that tells us exactly what sex is about, right? Whether you like it or not, the world is telling us that, as women, we should, be walking around, half undressed in order to get the attention that we crave, that we desire.
Right.
Pop culture is always encouraging women to degrade themselves
Right.
for love. And for young men, wow, they're being told that the more notches they have on their bedpost, the better for their manhood, right? And these are just a few examples. So
Yeah.
is sex purely carnal, or is it sacred?
Right.
Right. And as a woman of faith, and I'm a woman of faith, and sometimes that's a really also, sensitive subject that can be another conversation, right? But as a woman of faith, it's so important to be able to translate what sex means in the bedroom
Right.
and what sex means outside of the bedroom. Is it really a mystery? Like, without honest discussions, we won't know what is normal.
Yes.
You won't know what is healthy
Right.
in a relationship.
Right.
And that's very, very challenging in a committed relationship, or, for our single, women and men, um, to navigate through that sexual emotional charge that we all experience.
Yes.
Sometimes daily, sometimes hourly. Like, and if we don't know what healthy is, how are we going to know what's not healthy, right?
Absolutely. So then when it comes to your practice and the people that you've seen, I want to talk a little bit, speak to your avatar. When they come to you and it has to do with intimacy and sex, what are you noticing are the commonalities, the common thread, the common denominator, how they tend to see the challenge that's manifesting in their relationships?
And I work predominantly with women,
Okay.
and then I'm also now starting to work, as I'm talking more and more openly about sex and sexuality. I'm starting to work with more couples as well.
Mm. Okay.
And the real common thread, you know, across the board, actually has nothing to do with sex. It
Yes.
has to do with how we view ourselves,
Mhm.
and um, the narrative in our mind and the mindset that either elevates, our confidence within ourselves, feeling secure within ourselves.
Right.
And it's so interesting that in order to really tap into our essence as sexual beings,
Yes.
we really have to be able to cultivate a sense of self,
Okay.
a sense of self. And there so many, we hear the statistics of people getting married and getting divorced. And no matter what, people are always looking to connect,
Yes,
looking to
they
find a partner.
are. Yes, they are.
And it's very different for men than it is for women.
Right.
And for women, we're constantly fed this story of, we have to be subservient, or we have to give and give. And then for men, it's about, their manhood and being strong and being the providers. And then the roles get mixed, because as women now, we're, we want to be successful. And what does that mean? The the
Mhm.
the samples that we have out there, the examples that we have, are that in order to be successful, you have to be hard. And that is all, there's this aspect of femininity that is soft, and yes, there's this aspect of masculinity that is hard.
Right.
And we have to be able to navigate through both.
Right.
um, so
Absolutely.
the commonalities always come back to that sense of confidence within yourself, and really having that trust
Okay.
that you can navigate through challenges.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I could see it being difficult, like, even, when I look at the influence of social media and what's happening in the world, and all the messaging that comes in, from a male's perspective. And again, I'm talking like heteronormative relationship, me as a man, I there's that pressure to feel like you said, we have to be masculine, but sometimes it's a toxic masculinity, or sometimes, because of that pressure, you end up being disconnected when it comes to intimacy, right? But you think that this is the way to be intimate, right? And I understand it's just about blocking out some of that messaging, but it takes time to really understand what it means to be masculine, and what it means to even to be have feminine energy, right? And what is it that really resonates with me and my partner, right? But it's a journey. It's a difficult navigation, is what I found. Like, now it's getting better, but at the beginning of the process, it was a challenge just to navigate that landscape.
Yeah, it absolutely is. There's always, these expectations, right? And most of the time, um, where, we're setting unrealistic expectations,
Yes.
um, you know, that makes people feel inadequate. And what's so important is for our listeners to really embrace, their ability to see those trials and those tribulations that they've gone through,
Mhm.
and to not go into despair and not feel that, they don't have access. There's so much access, and the access comes from education and knowledge, and being able to talk about, this topic, so that, we can openly understand what is the essence of our individual sensuality, and what are our needs, and how can we really elevate ourselves so that we can meet each other's needs. And I am talking from a place of heterosexual relationships, because that's what I'm familiar with.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And what I would encourage all of our listeners is to just really ask questions, reach out, and don't let this be a taboo subject that holds you back in all the other areas of your life. Because if you the way you do one thing is the
Yes.
way that you do everything.
Very true. And it's funny. It's just it can be so difficult to talk about sometimes. Like, I often wonder, is there a right way? Like, if you're entering into a relationship, do you have these conversations pre-intimacy? Do you have them during? Do you have them afterwards? Like, when is the right time to navigate and say, let's discuss this? Do you wait and you kind of focus on the good and bad and say, okay, let's talk about this? Or do you come in entering and say, this is my preference. This is kind of what I like, which takes away the romantic element. Like, it helped me here. Like, what do you?
Well, first you have to, the first thing that is crucial is to, and it has nothing to do with sex. It's understanding your own values. Like,
Mm,
what is it that is important to you?
right.
And values are those, you know, those things in our life that really matter to us. So in order for you to be able to even connect at the intimacy level with somebody else, you have to know what your values are so that you can bring them to the table, so you
Mm,
can understand. So for example, communication. If
yes.
communication is one of your top values, then what does that look like? What does that feel like when
Mm,
you are connecting with somebody from that place of communication? You
okay.
know, you're expressing yourself openly,
Yes.
you're listening, right? And what does
Mm,
it look like and what does it feel like when your partner is interacting from that place of communication, right?
right. Right.
They're holding space.
Yes.
They're holding space for you so that you can express yourself, and vice versa. You're holding space for them.
Yes.
And a lot of times, you know, we think through things before we even listen, right?
Okay.
So how can sex and sexuality be connected to communication and listening? Well, if you're not communicating and you're not listening, then there's going to be a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstandings, and that's when the expectations start showing up.
Mm, I see. Well said. Well said. Yeah, it's so fascinating. It really is. I look back at, my childhood. Like, I even look at, when men speak amongst other men and groups of men, and the advice that we give, which is not this at all, But I mean, I think times are changing, but it's, if we can encourage one another to have these conversations, I think we can have happier, healthier, intimate relationships as well, right? But when you start to peel the layers, you can see there's a lot there. Like, what are your values? What is important to you as a person? Have you taken the time to understand yourself and what's important to you authentically before you're
Mhm.
starting to connect with someone? So I love that you're diving into all those elements of that. And I'm curious then, when someone has identified these challenges, what does that, maybe the outcome, look like? What, in terms of assisting someone through this process, what do you typically do with your clients that you're working with?
I always start with really understanding our history. We have to
Okay.
understand our history. And there's so much studies now that really show that, you know, we hold on to generations of trauma, right?
Mm,
And we can't sweep these things under the rug. And I'm not talking about, you know, meeting with clients and, you know, just spending time rehashing the past. No, it's about understanding how, you know, the sensory details of experiences,
okay.
the needs of those experiences,
Okay.
and then how they are connected to our values, so that most importantly we can understand the triggers that show up for us when when there is an expectation and it's not met,
Right.
or when
Yes.
feelings are hurt, right? When there's misunderstandings because of the lack of communication. And
Right.
when you can understand the sensory details within yourself, within your own body, then you'll have a higher level of awareness to really um, tap into and expand your capacity for compassion and
Mhm.
empathy and love. And it has to first start with self empathy, self compassion, and self love, so that you can really provide the space to be able to create and build that foundation for
Okay.
a healthy relationship. I mean,
Okay.
as people, we learn from each other, and we
Yes.
have to be able to explore things together.
Okay.
Um, and that's what will allow us to be on the same page, so that when things get uncomfortable, when there's
Yes.
discomfort, then we can approach those
Yes.
topics, right?
Yes. No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So, we have an idea of kind of your avatar. We know how it looks like when they come to you, and we can have an understanding of kind of how you help them and serve them. Now, I wanted to know if people are trying to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to locate you, get in touch with you, to work with you? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is right now through Instagram. If
Yeah.
you are on Instagram, you'll find me there with my name, Estela Rodriguez Jabril. And, send me a DM, send me a DM.
Yeah.
I do a lot of education, of course. Everything that I share is always based from a place of wanting to empower and educate. And as you look through some of the things that I share, and they resonate with you, just reach out to me. One of the things that is so important to me is just to be able to connect, If you have questions,
Mhm.
if there are things that, you've been really confused about, reach out and allow for yourself to cultivate that space to get the support that you need. Yes, of course, um, I have my programs, I have my one-on-one,
Yes.
clients, but I'm always available to support men and women because more important than anything, it's about connecting so that we can problem solve.
Mm.
That's what's the most powerful thing, especially with the internet and with social media. When you hear a conversation that resonates with you and you feel that connection, then that's the opportunity that's landed on your plate,
Yes.
for you to take action. And the only way that you'll be able to cultivate that place for growth and for transformation is by stepping out of your comfort zone and reaching out. And that's what that's what the responsibility is for all of you listening,
Yes.
to do that.
I love that. And you said something that I want to expand on. Thank you for sharing ways to connect, and we'll put that in this interview as well. You talked about the education piece, which I think is so important. And clearly, there's an onus on family to educate, but sometimes there's this generational, like you said, trauma or challenges, whether it's religious based or just upbringing or community culture. So that can get in the way of the communication. But my question is. Um, you know, should we put more emphasis, do you think, on educating our children in schools and high schools? Like, I feel like people say there's that saying, it takes a community to raise children. Like, should there be more of as an emphasis to educate? Western culture, I know we do educate, but is it enough education, before we send them
Yeah.
out into the world? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, there isn't, because there's a lot of research that shows that there's a lot of unplanned births out there, right? There's a lot of sexually transmitted diseases,
Right.
and the education component isn't happening.
Right.
It isn't. Yeah, we want our kids to learn how to read. We want our kids to learn how to write, and we want our kids to learn how to do math, and all that will come. But
Right.
the essence of our sexuality is something that should not be a hit and miss. It should not, and we have a responsibility. Because in countries like the US, in countries, Western countries, most important of all, we have the resources. Like, we
Yes.
have the resources.
Yes, we do. We do. And it's just, sometimes I feel like it's not used. And I've traveled a bit, and, I'm not sure which cultures, maybe you might even know where you feel like it's more liberated or open. And I was living in different places. I was living in Asia for a little bit, and some other areas. I felt like it was still very restricted and taboo. Are you familiar with cultures that might have a little more open-minded view towards open relationships and sexual intimacy?
I think right now, across the board, it's a taboo subject,
Yeah.
and everybody around the world is following the US. And right
Yes.
now,
Yes.
in Western countries, there's a lot of dysfunction, you
Mhm.
know, with, the issues that are going on with rape, with, sexual trafficking, right? There's
Yes.
so much harm that is happening because of the lack of education.
Yes.
And the education actually has to start at the family level.
Mm.
So in the schools, in the churches, in the mosques, in the synagogues,
Yeah.
right? In the places of worship where people come together,
Yes.
for the good of all, within the public education where the goal is, to allow for each generation to rise above the current one, right? But
Yes.
those of us that can, step in and encourage and support, I mean, we have a responsibility. And this
Mhm.
is why, this is what, the main reason why I do what I do, because I'm passionate about empowering people to really rise above, their circumstances and really achieve their highest potential, uh,
Okay.
at the physical level, the emotional level, and the spiritual level. And that all comes back to the sexual level.
Yes. I love it. I'm so happy that you carved out time to be here today. I think what you're doing is phenomenal. I think it's so important. You know, like you said, a woman of faith speaking to things that are taboo. It breaks down barriers. It changes things, and it allows people to shed some light on things that they just don't feel comfortable talking about. So have you speak to it, it creates a different space. It creates a platform to have the conversation. So thank you for doing what you're doing. That's phenomenal. Any final words for you before we wrap up today and sign off? And I do want to say thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you for educating. I took my notes. But yes, any final words before we sign off today?
I'm just honored to be here and keep this conversation going, because this is a crucial conversation that we need to have at so many levels, right? And before we jumped on, there were so many directions to go in,
Yeah.
uh, and this is something that is important. So reach out, ask for help
Yes.
if you're in a situation of just not knowing what to do or feeling frustrated, in your relationship, in your marriage, with yourself. Reach out. Reach
Absolutely.
out. Growth happens when we allow ourselves to get uncomfortable. So be okay getting uncomfortable.
There we go. Estela Rodriguez Jabril joining us today on Next Up in the Spotlight. Thank you for your time. Carving out time was phenomenal. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye. God bless.
Bye bye.